Hello, and welcome to a discussion of data visualization and communication. And the idea is to translate analytical results into managerial insights. And so the point of all this is that you might come up with some really interesting analytics, right? But if you can't communicate that effectively to your senior management, it really doesn't matter. So when we take a look at what is the state of the art, what is the best of the best in visualization, it's pretty clear now that almost everyone can create visualizations. That's been the case for quite some time. We usually stick with common ones that we use, though, primarily because they are familiar and people know how to interpret them at a glance rather than having to spend a fair amount of time kind of figuring out what it means and maybe even having to read it to know how to interpret it. So you'll see columns, bar, line, and pie chart, right? Those are probably the most common sort of visualizations you'll see, depending upon the type of data and the point that you're trying to make. Also, most of this stuff is either free or almost free or is bundled into some other packaging things, such as the visualizations that you get with things like Power BI and Excel as part of Office. It's a very compelling sort of offering or asset to that or extension to that offering to make it such that it's just easy to make really nice looking graphics. And there's always advancement, especially with the advent of generative AI assisting you with the creation of those sort of visualizations. We talk about best practices with visualizations, and we'll go over these in detail, but it starts off with the obvious of make them visually appealing. Don't make it stark and harsh unless that's intended, right? So make sure that your visualization approach is thoughtful. Keep things simple. Use familiar graphs when possible. Explain how to interpret unfamiliar graphs, and then explain what the graph represents. So we talk about making a graph visually appealing. Don't assume that people are going to read what you write. That's the first thing that you should learn whenever you're in the business world, is that if you write something longer than a few sentences, they may not read it at all. And even if it's a few sentences, they may likely skim over it because they're quite busy. You want to make your point where it's very evident, they don't have to hunt for it. And more than making your point, you're typically wanting to call for an action. You're making a recommendation of what should be done, not just, hey, here's some interesting numbers. People do typically skim over documents, especially if it's of any length, and even long emails as well. And if they're not appealing visually with graphics that draw the eye and so on, people will just simply stop reading. And when you're generating graphs, make sure that they're colorful, but colorful in a way that makes sense. The clear example, if you've got two flavors of ice cream, and you're getting opinions about each one of those brands, then the use of color brings a fair amount of impact. Additionally, some formatting as far as rather than just percent of consumers, it's now positive opinion and so on. Just a little bit of thought can make a big difference in what they do and how they're perceived and how impactful they will be. The same thing is true with your graphs. Sticking with them, making them both familiar, using them when the right graph for the right sort of situation. So if you're talking about a percentage of a whole, such as we have down in the bottom, you may want to call it out, right? So down here we've got a percentage of something, and this is the distribution by country. These are obviously some sort of scatter plot. This is a time series, just because you know that. Not because I know anything at all about the data, but because that's what those graphs are almost always used to represent. And in fact, if you use them for something else, you're likely going to confuse your viewer. So whenever you can, make it as simple as possible and use familiar graphs as much as possible. And they've existed for a reason, right? There's a reason why pie, bar, and scatter plots and time series plots are around for as long as they have been. There were alternatives, but they're more exotic and more challenging to both understand and create. Whenever you do need a graph that is interesting and complex, make sure you explain it and only use it whenever it is the right way to represent the data, such that some other representation is going to lose some element of the fidelity that you're trying to convey. Your managers, the more senior they go, the more the case, are very, very busy. They're focused on a lot of different things at the same time. They would appreciate it when you make things simple for them to digest. Also, when you do need an advanced graph, something that's challenging and interesting to understand, spend the time to explain it, potentially in video form. That might be a nice way to do it, especially if you're sending some sort of document to explain it, and basically break down how you read the graph if it's something that's more interesting. So do explain what's going on. Don't just assume that the audience is going to understand. And with that, a very simple introduction to graphs and visualization, a very interesting and complex topic, perhaps, because it's one of those things that it's really hard to make it look really simple, but at the same time, it's well worth it. So spend some time making your graphs look, and your visualizations in general, look good, appealing. Your audience will thank you. As always, thanks for watching. If you like this, like and subscribe. I will talk with you later.